Germany has tipped into recession along with the rest of Europe, like you said. And they just came out, their finance minister came out and said, we don't have any money left for the rest of the EU, and so Germany apparently is not going to backstop all these other debt-ridden countries in the Eurozone. Meanwhile, they're still shoveling money at Ukraine. They're up to 70-some billion dollars so far, and they're headed for another 70. They've got another 70-some billion in the pipeline. So they're shoveling money out the door when they're desperately borrowing money just to cover day-to-day expenses, and their interest costs, since the ECB has raised interest rates sort of the same way the Fed did. Everybody's interest costs in Europe are going through the roof. Every time any debt gets rolled over, it's at that new higher rate. So Italy is functionally bankrupt. So is Greece and several other European countries at these interest rates. So now we have this thing going where if the ECB stays tight, which it apparently is going to do because it just raised interest rates last week, even though the Fed didn't raise interest rates, that means that several countries and a whole bunch of companies and individuals in Europe are going to teeter off the cliff and go bankrupt, and they're going to have this amazing, huge financial crisis.
The Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to Watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Kerry Lutz. John Rubino is with us now. You find his work at rubino.substack.com. Go there, subscribe today. Well, John, the madness never stops, right? But on good news, the Fed hath paused, right? They paused with a big stick, I guess.
Hey, Kerry. Well, it's not even clear what they did or why, really, because yes, they did not raise interest rates at the last meeting last week, but they promised to keep raising interest rates at future meetings. So it's not clear anything got resolved. And the financial markets kind of had a relief rally in anticipation of the Fed pausing, as if that does anything. But then on Friday of last week, everything turned around and went back down because I think people got a chance to think it through. And first of all, if interest rates are going to stay this high, in other words, if the Fed stays paused, that is basically further tightening the monetary system, because every time any debt rolls over at the new higher interest rate, that tightens the monetary conditions of whoever's doing the rolling over. So things keep getting tighter. And then if the Fed comes back and does what it says it's going to do and keeps raising interest rates, then, monetary policy is overtly tighter going forward, which is bad for the financial markets. So stocks and bonds might have finally concluded that we're nowhere near the end of this. And so stocks they were up most of the day on Friday and then they tanked. So there was a triple witching options day. Right. So that could have been part of it, but I kind of think that it was just the buy on the rumor, sell on the fact or on the event kind of thing, where, okay, this thing happened that we were buying about, and now we realize it's not that good, so we're going to sell. And I think that's really the theme going forward, that financial assets are wildly overpriced given today's interest rates. So unless we cut interest rates dramatically, stocks shouldn't be this high. Bonds, it's hard to know about bonds in this whole thing, but stocks and real estate, forget it. They're vastly overpriced and they need to come back down.
Yes. Yep, for sure. And then look at what's happening in Europe. And besides the war, looks like they have a full-blown recession going on.
Yeah. Europe is now in recession, but there's a bigger thing at work here, which is that the only reason the Eurozone has hung together is because Germany, via the European Central Bank, which Germany controls, has been backstopping everybody else. So, if you buy an Italian bond, you're really buying a German bond because Germany stands behind the Italian bonds. First of all, Germany has tipped into recession along with the rest of Europe, like you said. And they just came out, their finance minister came out and said, we don't have any money left for the rest of the EU, you know, and so Germany apparently is not going to backstop all these other debt-ridden countries in the Eurozone. Meanwhile, they're still shoveling money at Ukraine. You know, they're up to 70-some billion dollars so far, and they're headed for another 70. They've got another 70-some billion in the pipeline. So they're shoveling money out the door when they're desperately borrowing money just to cover day-to-day expenses, and their interest costs, since the ECB has raised interest rates sort of the same way the Fed did, everybody's interest costs in Europe are going through the roof. Every time any debt gets rolled over, it's at that new higher rate. So Italy is functionally bankrupt. So is Greece, and several other European countries at these interest rates. So now we have this thing going where if the ECB stays tight, which it apparently is going to do because it just raised interest rates last week, even though the Fed didn't raise interest rates, that means that several countries and a whole bunch of companies and individuals in Europe are going to teeter off the cliff and go bankrupt, and they're going to have this amazing, huge financial crisis. Or the ECB has to reverse course in a hurry and start cutting interest rates, which will probably impact the euro. It'll tank the euro. So they're in that box that we always said was coming, where standing pat is a disaster, and going back to easy money, which always worked in the past, is now a disaster. Another thing that Europe is doing at the same time is they're enacting their version of a new Green Deal, where they're getting rid of, for instance, Germany got rid of all of its nuclear plants. Right. And tried to replace those with Russian natural gas, which didn't work out too well for them. And now they're not sure what to do, but they're going ahead with it anyhow. And the rest of the EU is on board with this. So they're buying up and closing down farms all over the place because farming is a polluting activity. So it appears that they're borrowing money to fund the Ukraine war. They're seizing and closing down farms. They're mandating that all cars become electric in the very near future. And they're doing it without any sense of where all this money is supposed to come from, because they're out of money. They can't just create an infinite amount of new euros and paper over all of this stuff. So I did a piece on Substack this week called Easy Money Makes You Stupid, European edition, and it's about this. And that's basically what it is. If money is easy for too long, you forget that money has to come from somewhere. You think it's just something that emerges out of thin air. Yeah. And the European leadership is in that boat. So major crisis coming. The question is, what's the best way to short European stocks right now?
Well, what's really interesting is that nat gas, which prices had really settled down, they were less than 50% what they were at the peak, over the past few weeks have gone up like 50+%. And no one can quite figure out why, other than the fact that Netherlands shut down the largest producing nat gas field in Europe for some reason that I haven't been able to ascertain.
Well, because it's a fossil fuel. So they probably figured, well, we're shutting down all our farmers, we might as well shut down all our natural gas production too. And so who knows? There's really no rhyme or reason to what Europe is doing unless you go meta and conclude that there is a broader plan at work to destroy the major world economies in order to create a pretext for the imposition of central bank digital currencies and mass surveillance and yada yada. The whole what's the term? Klaus Schwab's term. Anyhow, what the
Great Reset.
The Great Reset. Yeah. So a pretext for the Great Reset. And if you look at it that way, then it makes some sense. But if you look at it as countries honestly trying to manage themselves in ways that are sustainable going forward, it makes no sense at all, because they're doing the wrong thing in every case if they want to be around as they're currently configured 10 years from now.
Right. So one thing I'm adding to this, the China meltdown, So the problem is when you're watching YouTubes, you have no idea, unless they tell you up front, which I always do, who paid for this, who's funding this. It looks like we've got the emergence of like radio-free Ukraine or Europe that has come up on YouTube. It's kind of ultra nationalist, like America's winning against China. So, but on the other hand, there is a lot of negative stuff happening in China that is more or less undeniable, particularly their real estate issue, the unemployment, youth unemployment at like 29%, and the demographic implosion. All these things are true. Is it something they have a handle on? Are they in control? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that that this is an interesting situation that we need to pay closer attention to.
Well, yeah, you can't manage your way out of a financial bubble. You take it to a certain point and then it bursts, and you have to then manage the consequences of the bust. And so China's pretty much right there. Their real estate bubble it looks like it was bigger than Japan's in the 90s and the US bubble in the 2000s.
And now,
and now, which our bubble is if anything bigger right now than the bubble of the 2000s. But it looks like China's is even bigger than that. Something like 74% of household net worth in China is wrapped up in real estate because there was nowhere else for Chinese people to put their money. Which means it's not just a financial crisis, it's a political crisis. If 74% of the country is impoverished by something that flowed from government policy, the Chinese leadership must be terrified of the consequences of that. And plus, if people weren't already really mad about real estate, they have to be mad about lockdowns, because China, we were bad. We ruined half the small businesses in the country and cost most of our kids 1 or 2 years of social development. And what we did was terrible, but China was vastly worse. We saw those videos of people just locked in their buildings, going, "I'm hungry, I'm hungry," because
screaming.
Yeah. Or the building was on fire and they still wouldn't let them out. China did that.
Yeah,
and their people. They don't have a free media there, but their people still must, in fragments, know that.
Like us, John, we don't have one either.
Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? We do. It's just not the mainstream media. You and I can go online and find Glenn Greenwald today and Matt Taibbi tomorrow, and then go see Joe Rogan interview JFK Junior or RFK Junior. All of that is available to us because we know where to look. You're right, though, that the average person who still wakes up in the morning and turns on Morning Joe and then watches Fox or MSNBC at night, they don't have a free press. But at least it's available here, and you're not put in jail for doing it. But in China, it's a very dangerous thing to do, to try to get true information. So presumably a lot of their people don't know everything that's going on, but I think they know enough to be really mad, and the government knows that and should be terrified.
They know more than we think. So it's funny how it's all connected. Their meltdown, it's like it's the entire world here that we're talking about. It's not just Europe or the United States that's a basket case. And Russia. It's the entire globe here, John.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely global, because everybody has a unlimited fiat currency printing press. So instead of country-specific crises, we're going to have a global crisis here, and it doesn't matter where it starts. Any major country blowing up, like this Europe thing, if the Eurozone breaks up and $1 trillion of Eurozone debt reverts back to Italy and Greece and becomes halfway worthless in the process, that would be enough to blow up the big banks who are dependent on that debt, and pension funds and insurance companies, and then that would spread to the U.S. and then it would spread to China. It's funny. There are only a handful of countries that aren't participating in this, and Switzerland is kind of sort of one, and Russia is another one. They're not on a debt binge. And part of that is because they have so much oil. They can afford to finance themselves without having to borrow so much. But yeah, it's ironic that Russia is actually getting it right financially. And the supposedly free, supposedly wise countries of the world are just blowing it on an epic, biblical scale. And it's all about to come home to roost.
So what about talking to real estate and CRE and all that good stuff? When you look at that in San Francisco, the biggest hotel REIT just basically did jingle mail, just sent the keys to the hotels, thousands of rooms to the lenders. And, that's just the tip of the iceberg here.
Well, San Francisco is sort of the poster child for incredibly bad management leading to a commercial real estate bust. And then for them, it's a done deal. There's no way out of it. And there are all these buildings out there that are only worth half of what they're carried on their lenders' books as. So they're going to be sold, or they're going to default and revert directly back to the lender, or something. Something will happen to reveal the true value. And then the banks and the insurance companies and the pension funds who own the debt or the buildings outright are going to have to report those losses. So it'll start in San Francisco. San Francisco might not even be an actual city 10 years from now. It's not clear what the solution is. You would have to elect people who are functionally Republican, like a Rudy Giuliani kind of mayor there, which would never happen. But you would need somebody to go in and go, okay, from now on, everything that's illegal is an actual crime. We're gonna lock you up for sleeping on the street and for shoplifting and everything, and just clean house. And that's not going to happen because there is never going to be a majority of San Franciscans who would vote for that. But in the absence of that, San Francisco is just going down the drain now, and I don't know what the solution is, except that it's one of those laboratory of democracy things where we all get to try different things and we see how it works out, and we see some models fail. And this is going to be a model that is shown to fail, which I think will be really useful in other mayoral races out there, because if you're running for city government and you've got San Francisco to run against, that makes a clean streets, law and order platform a lot easier to sell.
So, when you talk about cities imploding, the violence across the country over the past weekend, shootings, mass shootings all over the place, mostly in these failing cities, but elsewhere as well. It looks like the country is just coming undone. Yeah,
we absolutely are, which is basically what happens when you screw up your financial system. If you borrow too much money, life gets hard for working class people, and that's the majority of the people in the country who see the system as failing them. And as Gerald Celente likes to say, when people lose everything, they lose it. Yeah,
and I just had him on last week.
He must be having a lot of fun with all his predictions turning out to be true here.
Well,
wait, he predicted World War III, which hopefully that one doesn't work. I hope.
Let him pick that one to be wrong on.
Yeah.
But he predicted this endless war for many, many years. He's been talking about that. And it looks like we're in the thick of endless war. And, that I find completely distressing. When you go back the history of the United States, all 200, nearly 50 years we've been at this, we've only had 12 or 22 years of peace where we weren't at war with somebody during that time, John.
Yeah. Well, and it's much worse now than it was back then. I mean, it was bad then, but now, we are basically run by an aristocracy that profits from people being sick and from endless war. And they're running the government. It doesn't matter whether there's a Republican or Democrat president, because the people who make policy behind the scenes are all making fortunes off selling arms to every brush fire war and every proxy war out there. And they seem even to think that it's worth rolling the dice on a nuclear war, because can you imagine the if we go to nuclear war, how much it would cost to rebuild our military afterwards, and they would make all that money.
About it. We don't need to worry about it then.
Yeah.
This whole thing is just, and I think that the whole Biden bribery scandal is tied in with endless war. I find it hard to believe. I mean, obviously, we're speculating here that if Trump had been reelected, that there would be a war in Ukraine now. I just don't think it would have happened.
Well, there wasn't when he was there. So that's the data point we've got. We've got those 4 years with no new wars, and that's a good thing to run on if you're Donald Trump, because that's a real thing that actually happened, that he presided over. And so we can say, yeah, but give him 2 more years and we're probably in World War III. I mean, that's the way you run against that statement of his. But he's got the evidence. You've got conjecture if you're arguing with that. And who would have thought that looking back on the Trump years, they were the good old days when we felt safe.
Even the Obama years and the Bush years with the wars and all that.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't as bad as this. But, the Trump indictment, and then they just overlook the president's exact same misdeeds with handling classified materials.
Well, Kerry, in polls now, 55% of the U.S. Populace sees this as a politically motivated indictment. In other words, the Biden administration using the mechanisms of government against a political opponent. So that's another useful data point. That means more than half the population sees through this.
And
finally,
that's directly giving rise to RFK Junior. And his popularity, he's viewed more favorably than either Trump or Biden. I don't know DeSantis, but he's more popular than them.
Did you see the Joe Rogan interview just now?
I caught bits and pieces of it.
Okay, if you have a chance,
$1.5 million, they got up to $1.5 million to get this Hotez guy to debate Kennedy.
Yeah, I listened to that whole 3.5 hour long thing with Joe Rogan, and that's one of the best interviews I've ever heard. You understand RFK Jr. after that, because Joe Rogan just basically let him talk, So the guy got to lay out his life story and the premises for his beliefs uninterrupted. It was brilliant on both sides. A brilliant job by the interviewer and a brilliant job by the subject. And I would, after hearing that interview, I could comfortably vote for RFK Jr., even though I think we disagree on a lot of the broad political policy issues. But the guy is, first of all, incredibly articulate. He's got facts and figures and names and dates at his fingertips. He is not a senile old man. And he's
60-something, right? 70.
He's not a young guy. He's definitely in the generation of the senile old men that we're looking at otherwise, but he's not one of them. And his take on vaccines and on the corruption within the healthcare establishment, it all makes total sense. And I don't know if it's factually true because I don't have any way to verify what he's saying, but it's coherent and it hangs together, and it describes the world that we live in pretty well right now. So, I think maybe the best that we could hope for this time, because Trump is totally going to get the Republican nomination if he's not in prison, and even if he is in prison, I think there's a decent chance. He's in prison, he gets elected president, he pardons himself, and he's in charge again. But if Trump were to say, all right, elect me and I will take RFK Jr. and I'll turn him loose on the bureaucracy, and he'll reform the healthcare system, and hell, we'll put him in charge of foreign policy too. We'll just let this guy go in there and clean house. That would be an attractive ticket to me. Name Ron DeSantis your vice president and RFK your fixer, and then just go for it.
And I've not really heard either of them going after the other,
RFK and Trump?
I really haven't heard much.
I suspect they, RFK talked about Trump in that Rogan interview, and he was respectful. He didn't say he liked Trump or anything, but he said that he got why Trump was popular, because Trump is speaking the language of disenfranchised working people. And so he gets it, which that's half the battle right there. If you understand why Trump is popular, you have a view of the political landscape that most politicians don't have right there.
Hey, look, if anyone has a right to be a conspiracy theorist, it's a Kennedy.
Yeah, really.
It's a Kennedy. And man, I got to tell you, like, people are onto this. I had a guy installing a sink, African-American guy, really beautiful guy, amazing guy, a hard worker, and just a good person. And we were talking about it, and basically we agreed. They're just trying to divide us and make us hate each other, because then we don't pay attention to the real issue. That's really what this whole thing is about. So demonization and fear and manipulation, that's the language of our elites, our governors, our governing unelected governing body. That's the language. That's how they stay in power. So if you were to get a Trump and an RFK together, who knows, man? Who knows? But Kennedys don't have the longest or the greatest life expectancy when they enter politics.
No, he's being very brave by running on the platform that he's running on. My God, and anybody who runs for president on a platform of getting the corruption out of the healthcare establishment and shutting down the military empire. Yeah. Their life expectancies in the weeks. Well, he told the story, RFK did, of his, I guess his uncle, John Kennedy, right, who they had a lot of advisors in Vietnam, and some of them were getting killed. And John Kennedy didn't like seeing U.S. soldiers be killed, and he said, pull them out. He gave that order to pull out of Vietnam. 3 weeks later, he was dead.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know about the details of that timeline or anything, but it does make sense, because Kennedy was definitely a skeptic of the military industrial complex, and he, despite everybody advising him to go to war a couple of times, he decided not to do it. So it's easy to envision him butting heads with the CIA, and for the CIA deciding, screw it, we're just going to take him out. That hangs together very easily as a scenario that could have happened. So it's consistent with everybody involved.
He had a bunch of enemies: the mob, the intelligence community, the oil industry, because he wanted to get rid of the depletion allowance, which basically enables most, if not all, oil companies to virtually defer their taxes indefinitely. As long as they keep producing more and more oil, their depletion allowance goes up and up, and as they pump, they depreciate the wells. And basically, without getting into a full-blown explanation, this is how they pay limited taxes. Certainly the smaller oil companies, maybe not the large multinationals. And he had a lot of enemies, and just like the movie Casino, with Joe Pesci's character. So there's a lot of holes in the desert, and a lot of problems been solved in those holes.
And don't forget LBJ too, because apparently Kennedy was getting ready to drop LBJ from the ticket for the next election, and LBJ was being investigated and would have been indicted for corruption if he wasn't immune by being vice president. So he had a really good motive for killing JFK.
Plus, follow the money. Who became president?
Yeah.
And he knew, like, he always, his father died young. All of his male relatives died young. If you read the Robert Caro book, Rise to Power, he always knew that he was going to die young, and as a result, this was his only shot to become president.
Yeah.
And maybe he took it,
just as a general rule, most vice presidents would kill the president if they knew they could get away with it. We can say that, right? You're a narcissist if you get to that point. Yeah.
Look at Reagan, 170 days into his term, he was shot, and who was going to become president then?
The,
And they didn't like Reagan either, you know?
the former head of the CIA was going to become president, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't Bush? Bush was the VP under Reagan,
He
wasn't
was the VP, yeah.
he? Okay, he was the former head of the CIA. So why would you name a CIA agent as your vice president and give him an incentive to kill you if you're the president? It just doesn't seem like it makes sense.
But it didn't work, man. Like, they failed. That's the thing. The hit on JFK, assuming it was a hit, was really sloppy. There were
Oh my God.
loose ends, which is why all these people are dead, and why all they had to step in and do the cover up and the Warren Commission and all of that. And who ran the Warren Commission was, I think it was Dulles, John Foster Dulles, who JFK had fired as head of the CIA. All these little pieces, but let's not relive that. But this is going to be an election like no other one here, because RFK is going to be a player. And what will it take for him to back down? What will they be able to do or throw at him? You think they had a dossier on Trump, even though it was all fake. They got a dossier on RFK, but he's smart. He's admitting all of his sins up front. And
in today's world, it's not clear what could be in his dossier that would get him disqualified, right? Because it's already been done. Like Huey Long, I think it was you can't touch me unless you catch me with a dead girl or a live boy, and it's possible even that wouldn't do it these days. So,
and we could get into maybe Huey Long was a political hit from FDR, because he was a populist and he was threatening and all of this. And, there were a lot of people that weren't happy with the New Deal and the socialist trend that the country was heading in. So Huey Long really kind of symbolized all that. And he was certainly no choir boy, old Huey.
I wonder if the aliens have been watching us long enough to know the truth about all this stuff, and they could tell us what really happened in every single one of these things. That would be cool.
I guarantee it's all in Hillary's emails. Yeah, confidential documents are only important depending who's holding on to them, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I guess that is it for this week. We covered a lot of territory here. Make sure you go over to John's site, rubino.substack.com. Subscribe there. Check us out, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Get your free newsletter. John, we will catch up with you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, see you, Kerry.